Hello, we are now in week 4, video 2, and we are going to study Eva. Sorry to disappoint you, but Eva is not a beautiful lady. It is just a financial concept, EVA, economic value added, developed in the US in the 90s and broadly used to measure the value created by a company or a division or a business unit or any entity for which you can isolate the operating margin and the capital employed. Before going further, let's remind the definition of the economic profitability or the economic return of a company. The ratio is EBIT multiplied by 1 minus T, we call it NOPAT in the previous video, divided by capital employed. And you see that this ratio can easily be decomposed in two elements. EBIT multiplied by 1 minus T, divided by sales, multiplied by sales, divided by capital employed. In other words, the product of an operating margin and a capital employed turnover or productivity. How much sales the company is generating per dollar of capital employed. If I present to you two companies, A and B, A has an operating margin of 3% and B an operating margin of 8%. Which one do you prefer? Don't answer too fast. Think and say, it depends. By the way, it is the right answer in 95% of the question that you may have in finance. It depends indeed upon the capital employed turnover. A has, for example, a capital employed turnover equal to 4. A low capital intensive business, such as a supermarket chain or a service business. B has a capital employed turnover equal to 1. A capital intensive business which requires a big amount of fixed asset and of net working capital. Now tell me, which one do you prefer? The answer is now clear. A has a ROCE equal to 12%, 3% margin multiplied by 4 capital employed turnover. While B has a return capital employed of 8%, 8% margin multiplied by 1 capital employed turnover. A is more the Chinese type of restaurant business. Not very expensive, but you get the bill before you finish your meal because some customers are waiting for the table. Low margin, high turnover. B is more the French restaurant type of business. More expensive, but you stay the whole evening enjoying some great wine, some cognac. High margin, but low turnover. Of course, everybody dreams of the French restaurant margins with a Chinese restaurant turnover. In my example, you'll get a return capital employed equal to 8% multiplied by 4, 32%. Wow. But be careful not to end up, as some companies do, with a Chinese restaurant margin and a French restaurant turnover. In that case, you will get a return capital employed of 3% multiplied by 1, which is 3%. The next graph shows some interesting example of the mix margin turnover for some well-known companies. Look at Walmart, for example. 4% margin, roughly 3.5 of capital employed turnover. ROCE, 14%. Look at Adecco. 3% margin, roughly 4.5 capital employed turnover. ROCE, 13.5%. On the other side, look at Eutelsat. 37% margin, wow, but 0.4 of capital employed turnover, very capital intensive business, huge investment. So 37 multiplied by 0.4 is 14.8. You see how you can get the same ROCE, but with a very different mix, a very different business model. A quick look at some very successful companies, some dreams. Burberry, 15% margin and 3.5% capital employed turnover. 15 multiplied by 3.5, 52.5% of return capital employed. Infosys, 18% margin, free of capital employed turnover, 54%. As a general rule, a company creates value when its return on capital employed is higher than the cost of its capital employed. It is not in the scope of this MOOC to detail the cost of capital employed. It is just enough to say that it is a mix of the cost of debt on the one side, what the lenders expect, and what is known as the cost of equity, which is what the shareholders expect from their risky investment in the company. Return on capital employed has to be higher than the cost of capital. This is obvious. It could be taught in elementary school to kids, and I'm sure they will understand that the return has to be higher than the cost. From that, we derive the formula of EVA, saying that the return on capital employed has to be higher than the cost of capital is the same than saying that EVA has to be positive. Let's summarize that. If EVA is positive, higher than zero, the company is creating value. If EVA is negative, less than zero, the company is destroying value. And the two ways of presenting the EVA formula, which are obviously identical. Let's finish with a very simple example of calculation of EVA, the economic value added. Let's assume a company which has an equity capital of 500 and debt of 500. So a capital employed of 1,000. Let's assume that the cost of capital of this company is 8%. And this company has generated an OPAT, which is EBIT multiplied by 1 minus T, of 150. So the return capital employed, 150 divided by 1,000 is 15%. Therefore, the company is making 15% of ROCE, its cost of capital is 8. Anytime the company is using $1, it creates a spread of 15% minus 8%, 7%, 7 cents per dollar employed. And because this company is not employing just $1, but $1,000, you just take 7% multiplied by the 1,000 and you find 70 of EVA. Now that you understand perfectly ROCE and value creation, we are ready to analyze the relationship between this return on capital employed and the return on equity that we studied in the first video through what we know as the financial leverage effect. This is the topics covered in the third video. See you in a moment for this exciting part of the financial analysis process.